It's not. You can't just like make a liberal Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan didn't become Joe Rogan and then and then, you know, right wing gave him money and he became an operative or something. I said top 2 are Rumble and most likely bought it, but this list is insane. I'm the only person on the left on this list. Right wing media is incredibly dominant. Incredibly dominant. People don't understand it. Okay. People do not recognize what the fuck is going on. And they're already writing think pieces where they're like, ooh, maybe we should wag the finger at the media diet of these people without like trying to figure out what the real underlying issue is.
The last election showed something pretty interesting and surprising to a lot of the pundits on TV and the internet. Young people voted for Donald Trump in 2024 more than they did in 2016 or in 2020. It's almost like the longer time goes on, the less democratic these youngest groups seem to vote and think. This trend was even more pronounced with young men. The 18 to 29-year-old male demographic in the U.S. went from a 41% Trump voter bloc to a solid 56% base support, a 15-point swing in just 4 years. The deterioration of young men in this country has happened so severely that young women are starting to literally give up on finding a healthy long-life partner, and student ministry leader friends of mine are struggling to come up with programming that can address this overt segment of male rage in any sort of healthy way. But how did this happen? We've actually been watching this happen for a long time now.
It's 3 a.m. on a Sunday night. All my friends are getting drunk, getting invited to parties and losing their virginity, and I spent all night working on my business. But just watch, in a couple of months, when I'm gonna be chilling in Dubai and living my dream life, you guys are gonna call me lucky.
It's 3:30 right now on a Monday night. I've been staying up all night working my new business. But watch, a few months from now, when my business is taken off, I'm gonna be chilling in Dubai, living my dream life, and everybody's gonna call me lucky. Okay, just watch.
Andrew Tate or Fresh and Fit viewers have always been known to be younger. For some reason, though, we all assumed that these literal children who are watching horrendous kinds of content would simply wake up one day and realize they've been lied to by amateur losers. But unfortunately, they still haven't. Instead, these young people have grown up and are looking for places to apply these terms and ideas that they've learned from a series of professional internet misogynists. And after a couple of years, they've finally figured it out. It actually wasn't that hard. They've all realized that they're all pretty comfortable in the evangelical church. Evangelicalism has always looked to young men as a source of growth over young women. And to be fair, the stats actually back that approach up. In general, statistics tells us that when a father of a family attends church regularly, the rest of the family is almost 100% more likely to attend with him, compared to when a mother attends first, the odds of getting the rest of the family to attend are much, much lower. So the evangelical church targeted these young men from the start, hoping to keep boys involved in the church as they come of age and look to marry and start families. These young men held the keys to the church's long-term health, and the church needed these men to get involved. But for a long time, most men typically rejected the evangelical church due to its overwhelmingly strict adherence to social principles that most men just don't seek out. Purity culture, abstinence from alcohol, politically agnostic ideology, these are the types of things that kept men traditionally from being involved in the church. At the exact same time, conservative political movements in the U.S. were also struggling to gain influence with young people in general. In 2008, the youth vote went for the Democrats by 66%, a huge margin that seemed impossible to overcome. The Republican Party and the conservative political wing in the U.S. needed young people to switch over to their own side in order to have even the slightest shred of a chance of staying relevant into presidential fronts in the future. And slowly but surely, they began to realize that their best hope of reaching the youngest voter base in this country was by going through young men. So we had the church looking to stay relevant to young people and realizing that the best shot they had was to reach young men. And at the same time, we had a political movement looking to stay relevant to young people and also realizing that these young men would be the easiest target to keep engaged. Now, all that's left in this equation is to add in the internet. We began seeing the influence of online conservatives and religious freaks pretty early on into the 2016 presidential election cycle. Everyone from Jordan Peterson to Tucker Carlson were going hog wild with weird takes in order to attempt to court young men in order to begin shoring up their bases with certain types of individuals.
If men make less than women, women don't want to marry them. This is not some Handmaid's Tale-like talking point that we in the alt-right believe. This is the product of like a century of consistent social science. And by the way, I wish it weren't true. I wish women were very excited to marry overweight, indolent men who played video. I'm serious.
So they began working on their macho man role plays and looking for ways to make fun of the feminization of our culture, and sought out news stories that would illustrate how important it is to remain attached to our testosterone-driven, big dick energy-having, male-dominated society. These people would wax poetic about how great society was in the quote-unquote good old days, when men were men and when the nuclear family was the centerpiece of American culture.
You have to ask yourself, like, can you have a functioning society, the basis of which is always the nuclear family, always, in such a place? And the answer is no, you can't.
And to their credit, if you were a certain type of person, meaning a straight white guy, going back 50 years would be pretty neat. Families functioned off of a single income. Having children wasn't so costly that you were forced to live in poverty just to give birth. And the general state of technology was advancing rapidly enough that industry and the American economy was booming. And if you are a man today, you might actually kind of see their point, at least a little bit. After all, wouldn't it be great if you could have a wife that listened to you and just stayed at home to care for the house that you could definitely afford to purchase with just a single income? Wouldn't it be awesome if you could just definitely say that the American economy was on top of the world stage and you directly benefited from that as a regular salaried individual? Couldn't you see the benefit of being a white man in the 1950s? Of course you could. It wasn't that long until the general church world also got on board with these conservative grifters, because of course they did. I mean, after all, the evangelical church in America was already in the pocket of conservative political ideology groups by the 2000s. So when the conservative talking heads began targeting and advertising to the young men of America, they also saw a direct way to benefit. These churches began to quickly reframe some of their ideology to fit that narrative. While purity culture was here to stay, there was a concerted effort to de-emphasize the sins of sexual impurity for men and overemphasize those same sins for women. Women are told that the single best way they can find a good Christian husband is to modify their speech and their looks and keep their bodies covered and their legs closed. And for the men, they were taught that the best way they could find a good Christian wife is to simply only date the women that followed all of those rules that the church made up for them, because this meant that those women were malleable and compliant. Men were taught that they needed to be in charge of their partners first and foremost, because that is the role that God laid out for them within the family. Similarly, the church began to slowly de-emphasize the role of Jesus' message of pacifism and grace, and instead rely more on the Old Testament teachings of justice for those people who followed God's commands. Because why offer up a biblical viewpoint of grace and love when we can instead focus on the great warriors of Scripture and keep men interested in standing up for what's right in the world?
There's nothing that makes you more formidable than verbal competence. And being able to articulate, be able to think, to marshal your arguments, right? It's a battlefield metaphor. Get everything in order. Get all your information straight. To marshal your forces.
As long as the definition of what's quote-unquote right was a strict conservative social hierarchy. As time progresses, the once upheld lines between the conservative world and the church world begin to blur all the more regularly. It becomes more common to see things that are obvious political conservative talking points like this.
The original idea was that men were supposed to act with honor and chivalry in protecting women, and women were supposed to look for example, relationships just as men were. Sexual activity was supposed to be confined, this was at least the ideal, was supposed to be confined to committed relationships, particularly marriage. Not everybody lived up to that, but a huge number of people did. When you don't teach men to protect women, you get men who will victimize women. And when you don't teach women that they ought to cherish men who are responsible and good, all you end up doing is incentivizing bad male behavior. The feminist movement was not wrong when they said men are acting like pigs. They were wrong when they said women also ought to act like pigs and that this is a solution to our problem.
In places like this, the local church with a pastor who can only be described as a political grifter that serves communion.
So, we've gone from the earliest feminists meeting at a church, that Wesleyan church back in 1848, to more recent feminists infiltrating the church and actually ridiculing the charter of the church, the Word of God. I'll say this as plainly and as straightforwardly as I can. Feminism is a cancer. Feminism is a poison concocted by Satan himself in the very bowels of hell as he carries out his mission of blinding unbelievers and deceiving believers about God's perfect plans and purposes and design for women.
And these pastors turned political grifters become more and more online themselves. They become glorified televangelists on YouTube or whatever other places they go when YouTube inevitably bans them for hate speech. And their goals are simple: to advertise an understanding of social conservatism that appeals to men first and foremost. Men are being taught to prioritize their family's well-being over the well-being of their neighbors. They are taught to safeguard the family from all types of social progressivism, especially when it comes to that gay shit. And they are taught to dominate their wives, to only look for women that comply with a specific type of relation dynamic that keeps them as the final decision maker of the family. And most importantly, these men are taught that the best way to accomplish all of these things is not to attend church or read the Bible or understand Jesus. The best way to accomplish these things is to vote for Donald Trump. And the main tenets of this idea of conservative male headship within the family don't actually just stop with male audiences. After all, the trad wife movement is alive and well, and it is attracting women in droves. Though I admit that these movements are less about attracting women, and I think more about making money online being jerk-off material for men who want to view a certain type of female. But I digress. They're still convincing some young women to follow after a specific type of relationship that really only should exist in the past. But we'll talk about that some other time, because these weird porn star adjacent female content creators probably need their own video.
It's a kink, right? The trad wife thing, the submit to your husband, it's a fetish. One dressed up as tradition and religion, but like, come on, guys. Come on.
All right, I'm gonna unwrap it and I'm gonna take a bite. Oh, it's so hot.
Anyways, the real problems with these types of male domineering grifters is the fact that they are having a ton of success, as evidenced not only by their incomes and their metrics, but also by the fact that they have combined their efforts to successfully goad men into supporting the Republican Party with more enthusiasm than ever before. These young men are falling for grifters both in the church and outside the church due to promises of power and success. They think that this attitude of misogyny will help them get women, maybe even these hot trad wives they jerk off to on OnlyFans. Yet similarly, they believe that any woman making money on the internet with their body is a worthless slut. So that doesn't make sense. These people also think that the best time to have ever lived in the US was in the 1950s. Even though the reasons for that would have mostly been due to progressive economic policies of rich taxation and the mass adoption of unions in the workplace, two economic ideas that they have been convinced to vote against by these same stupid grifters. These people also think that the best way to have happiness is all about having power over others, whether it be over inferior religions, or over the opposite sex, or over these stupid libtards who are, of course, never going to get women and never have families and who are never happy in anything ever, according to these grifters. The young boys in this country are being swayed by lies from complete losers online. Men that have bad chin lines and who don't know how to pleasure a woman in the first place. These people are not real men. They are simply authoritarian dick suckers who will say anything and everything it takes to get them paid by their wealthy donors and their audiences. These are closeted homosexuals.
The straightest thing you could do is to never have sex. And everyone knows that's true.
That literally cannot figure out how to be happy in their own bodies, yet tell us that progressives are the ones that cannot accept nature. How sad. And this is especially sad, by the way, due to the fact that these grifters are having so much accelerated success with young people because of the absolute drought of positive social relationships that young men and boys have in our culture. Young people are socially stunted by a culture that has been impacted by economic suffering. The COVID years, which studies are showing have done irreparable damage to people who are in their teenage years in 2020, not to mention that they are caught in the middle of one of the most politically divided eras of our own ideological brain rot. The young people in our churches, schools, and workplaces are falling for these losers in record numbers. And the truth is that I do think they will eventually figure out that this is not a winning ideology. But the question then becomes, are we really able to wait them out? And I would say no. By the time these poor young people finally figure out that they've been duped by lonely men on cameras, the country will have already been impacted, as it is being right now. We must focus on educating these young people. We need good pastors, male teachers, and father figures in the lives of these young people to seek out ways to exhibit what true manliness is. We need male figures online to explain that the reality of dating and relationships is not one that needs to be so male-dominated and force women into subservience. So look for ways to partner with young people. Teach your kids or your friends' kids or your nephews and cousins the truth about what it's like to be a man. Look for ways to volunteer with kids that need positive male role models. And if you're a woman, remember that you are a role model for the kids and relationships that young men can look forward to. You can influence the types of realistic expectations they should have about relationships they will have in the future. Being a man has nothing to do with male headship. It has nothing to do with how many women you can date or how compliant your girlfriend or wife is in bed or in your relationship. If you want to be the sole financial provider for your family, then that's great. It's totally fine. In fact, I'd be jealous of you, but it's not a requirement for being a man. And by the way, if you just have this weird 1950s woman fetish and you want to bang your wife after she bakes you sourdough bread or something, that's also fine. You're allowed to do that. But you don't have to expect that every single woman in this country needs to be interested in that specific type of weird fantasy, you freak.
So good.
Real men are passionate about the things and the people they surround themselves with. Real men do protect their families, including when it comes to protecting their children from dumbass masculinity. Real men do whatever they want to do, and they vote for whoever they want to vote for, and they don't concern themselves with the opinions of lonely, no-chin-having losers on the internet who just want compliance from them. Real men know that their happiness doesn't come from hurting other people. That's all I've got. If you're a guy and you're struggling and you're worried about things and you're stuck in this lonely cycle of depression and anxiety, I totally understand where you're coming from. If you think that the best way to solve that problem is by beating up on women or having hatred for people, then I'm sorry, you're just incorrect. I promise you, you're incorrect. Reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you because I really am invested in our community not being filled with a bunch of feckless losers. So regardless, thanks for watching. Remember to care for the people who need you most, and remember that I love you all. Grace and peace.